Welcome to American Dreams, Keys to Success, with your host, Alan Olsen.
Welcome back. We're here today with Jim Knighton. He's the president and co-founder of Avid Biotics and also the owner of Knighton Family Vineyards. Jim, welcome to today's show.
Thanks, Alan. Glad to be here.
So, Jim, can you give us some background on your career line and schooling?
Sure. A bit eclectic, for sure. Nothing noteworthy as a child, but did my undergraduate work in biology from Notre Dame in the late 70s. And then after that, of all things, I went to work for Ford Motor Company for a few years after that. Knew that the auto business wasn't quite my cup of tea, and then decided to go back to graduate school in business. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania to get my MBA. But while there, Genentech was formed and was off to a real good start, and got reinterested and reengaged in the whole area of industrial biology, and stayed on at the University of Pennsylvania for a little longer to get a master's degree in genetics. And then after that, went into industry. I stayed on the East Coast, worked for DuPont for a number of years, and then got an opportunity to come out to California to do real biotech at Chiron, and moved out in 1994, came out to Chiron. And then after that, have been in the biotech industry here in the Bay Area ever since. Went on to become CFO of a company called Sugen, and we ended up selling that to Pharmacia, and then went on to become CFO of a private company, which we took public, called Caliper Technologies at the time, and rose to president. And then we did some transactions, moved it out to Boston, and I took my leave and then ended up staying here in the Bay Area. Didn't want to move to Boston, and then found myself founder of both Avid Biotics and the vineyard operation, and now wine operation.
Wow, you got quite a history there.
Eclectic.
So when you moved through the going from being the biologist in the genetic engineering to the CFO, did you find much of a transition there, or?
Huge. First of all, when I got into the industry, I never went to the bench. I got just a master's degree to familiarize myself with the language, the techniques, the technology itself, but always was in the business side. Something commercial, marketing, sales, finance, and then really settled more into the finance and market planning area. So it was a huge transition, for sure. And it's an interesting, almost unholy marriage between business and science at times. A lot of the scientists early on coming out of an academic environment, the business guys coming from various business schools or the School of Hard Knocks and in marketing and sales and big pharma, all coming together to really do, and venture capital, to grow an industry. And so it was the relationship between science and business that was one intriguing and has always been very satisfying, but at times challenging.
You know, it also speaks to your skill set, being able to go between science and business.
It has helped.
Not everyone can do that, and but you seem to have done that well, working with a couple of companies that have gone public and working through that. So when we get down to, you did two companies, I believe, with Sugen,
right,
and CFO, and then you also did Caliper,
right,
and then and then you moved on,
right,
and you did this new venture called Avid Biotics. What drove you into this new?
Basically, circumstance and timing. I had, after the Caliper transaction, and well, actually, when Caliper moved to the East Coast and I decided to stay in the Bay Area, a few years earlier, I had bought a small property up in Napa and basically went up there. There were no vineyards or any activity. It was just a small house in the woods, basically. And thinking about what I was going to do next, I then got a phone call from an old friend of mine I had worked with, scientist, who had an idea about a new company. And whereas when I was a much younger person, I was 50 when we started this, Avid Biotics, and the vineyard, by the way, I never saw myself as an entrepreneur, but was ready. I had done the big company, the smaller company thing, the medium-sized company, I should say. Had never done my own company. So it was timing and circumstance and being just prepared.
So coming together, your partner, you've worked with him before?
David Martin, yes, I have.
Okay, and then you're coming together saying, we're going to do a company.
Right.
We put our stake in the ground.
Right.
And I'm sure it wasn't that easy from there.
No, it wasn't. I mean, literally, no kidding. I slept on his couch for a while. I didn't think I'd be sleeping on couches at 50. Because I lived in Napa. We started the company down in South San Francisco. It's not commutable. So I'd come down a few times a week while we were penciling this idea out and getting the necessary licenses. So it was difficult. It was challenging. But it was started with a blank piece of paper and a great idea. And there were other ideas we had. We were going to finance it different. We were going to operate it different. But we were going to go after very different approaches to medicine. And that was exciting.
Exciting. Well, very good. So I'm visiting here today with Jim Knighton. He's the president and co-founder of Avid Biotics. He's also the owner of Knighton Family Vineyards. We'll be right back after this message where we'll visit more about what it took to get his company launched.
Protecting your family's health and welfare is a sacred trust. At Greenstein Rogoff Olsen Company, we know that sound financial planning will protect them now and in the future. We're certified public accountants with tax services for the highly successful. For your business and your family, call GrowCo.
Greenstein Rogoff Olsen Company will help you manage your financial affairs so you can focus on what's really important in life.
GrowCo, helping you along the way.
Apple pie, baseball, and now here's All-American Alan Olsen.
Welcome back. We've been visiting today with Jim Knighton. He's the president and co-founder of Avid Biotics. We've been talking about what it took to launch Avid Biotics, and also at the same time he's running a wine business up in Napa Valley.
Right.
So, Jim, when you're first starting out Avid Biotics, what would you say the largest obstacle has been for you to overcome?
Well, the most obvious one was money. I mean, this is not a low capital investment business. It's ridiculously expensive to develop, new medical interventions. And capital is the biggest problem. And we started it at a time when financing for biotech was getting more and more constrained. So financing this and keeping it going with a brand new type of business model was challenging. Another challenge it's not only in the early days, to this day, and we started this in 2005, has when you transition from management jobs in much bigger companies that are well-resourced, going to a much smaller organization where you do everything. Putting any type of ego, you have to put it all aside. I mean, you wash windows, you file, you pay. I have written every check out of Avid Biotics since the day we started. You don't have an infrastructure to help you with these things. That's been a challenge. It's worth the challenge. I'll highlight that. But it's a completely different way of working. And then the biggest challenge is a psychological one, in that you're working without a safety net. There is no net. And in my case, it took a lot of personal investment. So you're not drawing on this isn't a game and it's not a hobby by any stretch. You're risking virtually everything at a time in your life when most people are thinking about retirement. We're thinking about how we keep this thing going, taking massive risks.
It's interesting. They say that the entrepreneur is not necessarily focused on the money, but they're focused on the change, implementing a change.
Absolutely true.
Avid Biotics, what is the change that you're trying to implement to the rest of the world?
From the day we started the company, our target has been to bring new types of antibacterials to market. Dave Martin, my partner and co-founder of the company, knew through some of his prior medical experience and business experience that there was a huge perfect storm brewing that has been well publicized now, and that our antibiotics are becoming more and more ineffective against bugs, bacteria that have been easily dealt with in the past. And these bugs now have mutated, are no longer susceptible to current medical intervention, antibiotic intervention, and this is becoming a very large problem. And we needed a new way to deal with it. And that has driven us from the first day we started this company, and it does now. It's taken us in new directions, directions that we never thought we would go. But part of being an entrepreneur and having a business plan is being flexible. We are now, and we just signed a huge deal for Avid Biotics with the DuPont Corporation to develop this technology, or a very close cousin of this technology, for food safety. and now we are in discussions with new companies about having to use this protein approach for animal health. Areas that massive amounts of antibiotics are used, and there's a huge force justifiable to get antibiotics out of our food supply. Europe is way ahead of us in this area, and we need to find new technologies to, in fact, engage these bugs.
It's interesting. We hear about the antibiotics in our food supply, but I don't think we fully understand how much they're present there.
It's the thousands or millions of tons of antibiotics used every year on our farms and in our food supply is staggering.
It reminds me of last week I was at the store and I bought some organic milk. Mm-hmm. And I tasted that. I said, this doesn't taste anything like the other stuff.
We're in for changes, for sure. And I think it's relatively unusual that biotech companies have really advanced our technologies where we can have a real good impact on some of these problems outside of just human therapeutics. And we have found ourselves in that position.
When you're developing this, government regulation, is it still there? Is it lessening? I mean, how do you...
It's a very good question. Oh, no, government regulation is still there. We will have to get all these products approved through the FDA, and in the case of some of them, and the USDA. We will say, however, the government's involvement of this, when we couldn't find funding through traditional sources, the government did a great job of stepping up through the NIH and helping fund antibiotics. We're here today because of it.
I'm visiting here today with Jim Knighton, president of Avid Biotics. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Jim and discuss how to operate multi-businesses simultaneously. We'll be right back after these messages.
Nothing's more important than spending time with your family. At Greenstone Rogoff Olsen Company, we're trusted advisors to the highly successful. Our goal is to help you find the right strategy to protect your wealth for yourself and those you love. Kids, why do I feel like I've just had an audit? As trusted advisors to the highly successful, we'll make sure that you don't lose your shirt.
Roco helping you along the way.
Apple pie, baseball, and now here's All-American Alan Olsen.
Welcome back. We've been visiting with Jim Knighton. He's the co-founder of Avid Biotics, and we're talking about him launching his company into a new venture that's going to help to solve some of the antibiotic problems in our food supply today.
Right.
And so, Jim, but in addition to this, you've been running another venture, Knighton Family Vineyards, and I think this wine in recent years has become very popular in bottling. I guess China has kind of put France on the map with. I'm part of an auction news site that that reports that some of the bottles have gone up for as much as $15,000.
I can only dream.
That's the thing, that the French have convinced that only French wine's worth that. But nevertheless, it's also pushed up prices of wine in certain markets. So can you tell us about your vision of how you got into the business of creating and growing grapes and processing wine?
Absolutely. Not unlike Avid Biotics, somewhat, in this case, almost totally by accident. After, I think I mentioned earlier that after I was done with the Caliper Technologies phase of my business career, I took some time off and had a very small home on a fairly large piece of property in Napa, 50 acres. I didn't even drink wine at the time. So, but after 3 or 4 weeks, after Caliper, I was just kind of antsy on what I could do next, started talking to people, and it was suggested to me that you should start a little vineyard as a hobby. Well, this has turned into no hobby. When you have a decent part of what is left of a net worth, it doesn't quite qualify as a hobby. But one thing led to another, and like anybody else, I think starting a venture like this, I got a hold of experts who did know something, and they were very encouraging about this. So I ended up planting it out. This is a fairly unique piece of property up at 1,500 feet on the site of Mount St. Helena in northern part of Napa Valley, and off a road called the Old Toll Road. So there's quite a bit of history to this. This is where Black Bart used to rob the stagecoach in the 1800s. No kidding. I mean,
wow.
It's a pretty fascinating little road, and turning into a very interesting little wine enclave with 4 or 5 very well-known winemakers setting up shop on the road. So planted out a little bit of this to find out if the grapes were good, got a lot of encouragement from notable winemakers, and teamed up with a very premier winehouse, Vineyard 29, in St. Helena, who bought all my grapes, and as a side would make me a little bit of wine straight from my grapes. They blend my grapes with others to make one of their Cabernet lines. And it turned out that the wine came out very well, and we basically sent it over to the wine advocate, Robert Parkers, and he gave us a glowing review of this. And now I find myself, with what little time I have in the vineyard wine business, worrying about all kinds of new problems. I don't have to worry about it at Avid Biotics, like the weather and things in turkeys and other little problems. But it's been just great fun. It's taught me more about business than biotech ever did. Biotech, in a lot of ways, isn't a business. It's a massive investment, and you find out if you have a drug or a product. You turn the card over in 10 years. Most of us don't worry about things like cash flow in and out, inventory, pricing, positioning your product, et cetera, et cetera. And the vineyard, now the wine, offers all those things. So I've actually found myself in a real business, albeit very small, but challenging, a lot of work, a lot of similarities between this and Avid Biotics that have surprised me. Partnerships are critical. My fiance and I are the only two employees of Knighton Family Vineyards, and Ann works this thing very hard, and it has continued to grow slowly, which is exactly what David and I are doing with Avid Biotics. And you grow it slowly, pay attention to quality, and the product will help you, and it won't take care of itself, but it is a great place to start, and it's turned out to be very rewarding. You know,
when you're doing the grape growing, timing's everything, isn't it? When you pick.
Oh, it is absolutely everything. Now, you also have to differentiate different levels. This is a very high premium wine, and customers are very, very discriminating at these price points. So you have to time. There's a lot of science to grape growing and winemaking. There's a lot of art to science and grape growing. We have all kinds of viticulturists that are in those vineyards all the time, judging the exact moment when certain rows should be picked in order to optimize the quality of the wine. But some of the best people that work in these vineyards are the ones who have been doing it for decades and know by instinct when these things are ready to pick.
So, from what I take it from what you've outlined, although you have a passion for it, it's not for the faint of heart.
It absolutely is not, nor is biotech, by the way.
You got two risky businesses.
Horribly
and
risky.
You seem to be doing well in both, though.
Well, so far, so good.
Yeah.
So far, so good. And the biggest challenge is time. There's not a lot of time to relax, but I find working on both of these things is relaxing, as fulfilling as
How much time does it take, 50 acres running that?
Well, interestingly, at certain times of year, it's very, very chaotic. Harvest right now in Napa Valley, harvest is well underway. We'll harvest in a couple of weeks, and that starts everything in the winery. But then there are times in the middle of the summer that the grapes are just growing. They're tending, but don't take a lot of time. Mm-hmm. So it all depends. And now that we started this. Actually, this was started the year before we started Avid Biotics. So this is 2004, with our first vintage being 2007. Now the marketing and sales are taking time on those off vineyard hours that it hasn't in the past. So it takes a fair amount of time, and we'll take more and more of it going forward.
Now, have you been private labeling at all, or?
Yes, this is all under the Knighton Family Vineyard label. We do only about 200 cases to a private mailing list, and that's basically our marketing strategy. We have it in a couple of country clubs, golf clubs, that people have bought the wine and wanted it on their club on the wine list, and that's the extent of it. So
a listener who wants to get a bottle, do you got a website?
We have a website, KnightonFamilyVineyards.com. We don't take credit cards yet on the website, but if you contact us, we'll put you on the mailing list, and we will send out notifications when we do our new release. And our new release will be next month sometime, and that'll be the 2009 vintage.
We've been visiting here today with Jim Knighton. He's a co-founder of Avid Biotics and also the founder of Knighton Family Vineyards. So, Jim, thank you for joining today's show.
It was my pleasure.
We'll be right back after these messages.
You're listening to American Dreams with Alan Olsen on AM 1220 KDOW.